Hello, this is the Ask Jasmine Money podcast. I'm Jasmine Birtles, financial journalist, and I'm joined by the political journalist Paul Osborne. This is a monthly podcast in which we look ahead to see how you can make and save money each month and have a smile as you do it. It's on the MoneyMagpie.com newsletter too, which you can sign up to on the website. It's April, the new tax year, and traditionally the time when a few new tax and benefit rules come into effect. This year, though, there's a flood of them. We'll go through them in a mo, but Paul, do you have an idea why this government, or maybe it's just George Osborne, I don't know, but why they've tinkered about with the economy more than any other government has, according to an impressive graph in The Economist?
One of the things that George Osborne has talked about and the Conservatives have talked about over the last few years is about simplifying the tax system, about keeping the government out of your affairs, out of your business too much. And yet, when you look at the number of changes to the tax system that successive chancellors have made, George Osborne's meddling makes Gordon Brown look like a committed non-interventionist. He has introduced so many changes, but I think the thing is that they've quite often been quite small changes. So he's made lots of little changes. And I think the reason for this, if you look back at the budget last month, was that, yes, there was the big shiny bauble of the sugar tax that everyone talked about on the day, and then there was the row over the disability benefits that developed over the days after the budget. What was actually the really important stuff in the budget was the discovery of how deep the hole in the public finances was, and the fact that because growth is slowing not just in Britain but around the world, his plan to fix the deficit and have a surplus by the end of the decade has taken a bit of a kicking. So he has to find ways to bring in more money. But of course, all the big things that he'd like to do, he can't do. He can't put fuel tax up, because if he puts the fuel duty up, then he's got millions of motorists in a bad mood where he can't risk offending them. I think if you tried to put the basic rate of income tax up now, there'd just be a mob with flaming torches and march down Downing Street. We've arrived at a position where it's politically impossible for a Chancellor of the Exchequer to do a big single thing like putting up income tax by a penny. So what he has to do is lots of little things. It's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. When you see the curtain pull back in the Wizard of Oz, and there's this little fella with all the levers, just pulling all these different levers and smoke pouring out everywhere. It's that kind of thing. So that's why the budget speeches take so long. It's why they're so complicated. It's why, and this dates back to Gordon Brown's time, it's why usually it takes 2 or 3 days after the budget to really figure out what's happening. Because it takes us 2 or 3 days to pick through everything in the budget speech, everything in the Red Book, and figure out what's really going on, which is also why there's always that shiny bauble. And this time it was the sugar tax.
Yeah, I was stunned by that because, yeah, sure, it's nice to think that maybe our children are being helped not to become enormously obese, but next to these huge figures, this big macro stuff that means actually in the long term we could all be poorer and having problems feeding our kids, let alone...
Yeah, I mean, how are you going to be able to afford to buy all this broccoli when you don't necessarily have any money? The numbers in the budget, and bear in mind the numbers now come from an independent body, from the Office of Budget Responsibility. This isn't the government fiddling the figures to make it look good. The numbers don't look good because growth's slowing around the world. Our growth forecast has come down quite a lot just in 6 months. And that does make a difference, because if the economy's not growing as fast and there's less tax revenue coming in, if there's less money coming in taxes, there's a big gap in the budget that you weren't expecting 6 months ago. You've got to fill that gap. So one thing he announced, and blink and you would have missed it, was an extra 31 billion in borrowing over the next few years, because he's got this gap that needs filling. But then kind of miraculously, he says that this, alakazam turns into a budget surplus just in time for the next general election. Now, it's not really clear, looking through the budget figures, how that happened.
One of the other things that he should be cutting back on, and he's not, because of course it would be a massive vote loser from the people who actually do bother to vote, is to reduce money for the pensioners. And what is coming in, probably the biggest thing, if you like, that's coming in this month, is the new flat rate state pension, and that was announced in 2011. The idea is that instead of the current system where people, and you have to be retired actually to get this, where people have a basic state pension of £119.30 and make contributions towards an additional state pension, perhaps. Now there's a single flat rate of £155.65 per week. That's the single overall, everyone gets it figure, except that not everyone does get it. Already you've got a confusion. I don't know, Paul, from your dealings in Westminster, what's the view there?
On paper it sounds like the kind of thing that will appeal to the very voters who won the Conservative Party the last election, because you are on paper giving all pensioners a pension rise without having to necessarily do anything. It's another attractive policy for older voters. And when we had the resignation of Ian Duncan-Smith, one of the things that he talked about when he resigned was that they were consistently being asked to cut more and more from the benefits that went to people of working age. But whenever he suggested making cuts to benefits for more affluent or more comfortable pensioners, he was told that it wasn't possible, that they couldn't do it. Now, there was not an economic reason for that. It's a political reason for that. The political reason is that older voters turn out and vote. We've said this before. If you're a young person, you're annoyed that politicians don't listen to you, well, go and vote. Because the reason they don't listen to you is, put simply, there's nothing in it for them. If you're not going to turn out and vote or actively vote against them, they're not going to listen to you. Old people vote, and significantly, they're more likely to vote Conservative. It was an army of older people that got the Conservative Party the election victory no one saw coming last year. Looking
forward, you've got a lot of young people who are already saddled with debt, and I'm guessing going forward they're going to be at some point having to pay more tax to cope with the ever-growing number of retired people.
Well, true, but I think there is a shift, and it's something I think you've talked about as well, that what the government is trying to do not just over the last year, over the last few years, is shift a lot of the burdens that have previously been on government onto individuals or onto other organisations. Some of the savings things that were announced in the budget, there's this thing about the lifetime ISA for younger people and all these things. I think it's an attempt to just a cultural change to shift the burden for a lot of this onto individuals.
I have been banging on about this for a while. A couple of other changes that are happening now is the national living wage. That is going up for those aged 25 and over to £7.20 an hour. Those between 21 and 24 will still have the normal minimum wage. And also the personal allowance is going up. In other words, the amount of money we're allowed to keep before the government decides they want some of it. I do think that it is, as you say, part of a longer term thing to put the onus onto individuals and companies that used to be on government. They're going to have to, as I'm always saying, and every other financial journalist I know is always saying, we need more financial education. But what was quietly not mentioned again in the budget, and frankly, I think he probably could have done, I don't think many people would have cared, is that the Money Advice Service, which has cost us millions, is being kicked into touch. It was a good idea, the Money Advice Service, but whoever ran it did very badly with it. They chucked money about and nobody really knew very much about it. It didn't have a face, it didn't have a personality. So the good information that was on the website was really not accessed by anything like enough people. But we do need to have a whole lot more education from cradle to the grave, not just at school, but through adulthood as well, about how to deal with these different responsibilities that we now have financially. If we'd had that kind of knowledge, we would realise that the other apparent giveaway that we're getting as of this month is really not much of a giveaway at all, because people are getting a little bit excited about the fact that we can now not be taxed on our savings, the interest that we get on our savings, up to £1,000. So that's a whole £1,000 worth of savings interest that we don't have to pay tax on, which sounds hugely generous until you realise that in order to get anywhere close to £1,000, you need at least £100,000 worth of savings, given the pathetically paltry levels of interest that we're now getting.
You would have to have so much money to benefit from this, that you would presumably be investing it in something other than just a savings account, sitting in the post office or something. The whole point of ISAs was it was tax-free saving. Now the interest in any account is tax-free. Why have I got an ISA anymore? Why am I going to the trouble of shopping around for ISAs at the end of March every year when they are really no different, aside from perhaps an introductory bonus of some sort, from just sticking it in the post office?
Well, I'm hoping that finally, people will go, oh, I'm all right with my savings. Oh, well, maybe I'll take a punt and get an equities, in other words, a stocks and shares ISA, which is what everybody should have been doing for the last however many years they've been around, like 16 years or so. I personally have never opened a cash ISA. I've always opened stocks and shares ISAs because the point of ISAs, and typical government product, they haven't marketed it properly, but the point of an ISA is as an adjunct to your pension. So it's a long-term investment. On average, savings accounts do not give enough interest to keep up with inflation at the moment, very much not. It's only really the stock market that will keep up with and beat inflation so that you can have a decent pot of cash when you retire. So hopefully it will at least make people go, oh, all right, well, go on then, I'll think about it finally, because I'm constantly banging my head against the brick wall about those.
I know you've mentioned stocks and shares ISAs before, but equally, share prices are a good deal lower now than they were a year ago, generally speaking.
True, yeah.
So I can't help thinking, if I had gone for a stocks and shares ISA a year ago and had got to the April 5th deadline this time, I could have ended up with less money than I had at the beginning.
Well, that's quite true. But then the thing is with stocks and shares, you have to think in terms of at least 5 years. So, yeah, sod's law, isn't it? That you put money in and just as you're putting it in, it goes down. But over time, if you look at the stock market over the last 50, 100 years, the trajectory is up. So this is the thing, for long-term investments, stocks and shares are always the best. But for short-term, and by short-term I mean anything up to 5 years, it does boringly have to be savings accounts because, as you say, the ups and downs, you need a good few years. And this is why when you put money in for kids, you should really be thinking in terms of stocks and shares, certainly babies, because they've got years for that money to grow. But if it's for saving for a car or saving for a deposit on a house, then yeah, it needs to be savings accounts. That's the only thing that's there. According to MetLife, I just had a press release in to say that cash ISA savers have earned just 1% a year for the past 7 years. So, you think, had you put money into stocks and shares 7 years ago, they genuinely would be worth a lot more than they were then. But 1% a year in a cash ISA, it's almost like sticking it under the mattress, to be honest.
If, so many people now effectively say that their home is their pension, that the plan is to cash in on the rise in the value in their house when the time comes. So is there even an argument for saying pay extra off your mortgage?
Yeah.
Rather than stick it in an ISA and earn 15 quid? Absolutely,
because actually paying off your mortgage is a tax-free investment, actually, because say, for example, you've got, mortgages at the moment, they are pretty cheap. You've got maybe 3%. So you've got a 3% mortgage. If you pay off an extra 1,000, say, you have saved yourself 3%. And because it's paying off a debt rather than earning money, apparently, the government doesn't tax you on it. So you've saved a tax-free 3%, which is the same as making 3% tax-free. If you're wondering where to put your money and you have a mortgage, unless it's at 0.5%, really it's a no-brainer, I think. Pay off as much as you can. Apart from anything else, it's secure. Once you've paid off your mortgage, you've paid off your mortgage. And on that note, I thank you, Paul Osborne. Thanks so much. This has been the Ask Jasmine Money podcast with Jasmine Birtles and Paul Osborne, and quite a serious one we've had.
It wasn't. It was chuckle free, or let's call it chuckle light. And I almost feel like I should do a joke or something at the end, but I haven't got any. A post-budget podcast is never going to be, like a stand-up gig.
No,
it's not going to be endless japery. But we'll We'll work on our jokes for next time, and if not, I'll bring a clown hat in.
Yeah, I think you would, because I think the listener would notice your clown hat. I think they'd be very happy.
Fewer jokes, sensible advice.
Absolutely, and some rather deep and philosophical political talk. I think this time you can hear this podcast on iTunes, on YouTube, and on the podcast page on MoneyMagpie.com. Remember to sign up to the free Money Magpie newsletter. Just click the box at the top right-hand corner of the site and follow me on Twitter for more news. I'm at Jasmine, and then Paul gives political commentary at Paul Osborne.